Broadcasting from the North Fulton studio of Business RadioX, it's time for North Fulton Voices. This show is brought to you by the North Fulton Improvement Network, addressing the workforce housing crisis in our region. Now, here are your hosts.
And hello again, everyone. I'm John Ray, and welcome back to this edition of North Fulton Voices. I'm here alongside Nancy Diamond and Jack Murphy. Both are members of the executive team of NFIN, the North Fulton Improvement Network. Nancy and Jack, good to see you again.
Good to see you, John. Thanks for having us again.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming in. And this is going to be a good one today because we have Kristin Allin with us, and Kristin is with the Atlanta Regional Commission. Kristin, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you here. Before we start the topic of the day here, let's talk a little bit about the Atlanta Regional Commission and that work for those that aren't familiar with it.
Okay, great. Yeah, the Atlanta Regional Commission is a quasi-government agency, and we're actually one of 12 regional commissions throughout the state of Georgia. So these were established by the Georgia Planning Act, and the goal is to help local governments with community planning. And so the Atlanta Regional Commission is the largest in the state, and we oversee a lot of different areas that are important to our different communities and to our region as a whole. That includes transportation planning, aging services, natural resources, workforce development, homeland security. And we have a lot of different areas under our belt for planning. And I'm in the housing portion of the Atlanta Regional Commission in the Community Development Department. So we have a lot of direct interaction with our different communities for planning.
That's great work. And there's a whole lot of things that happen in Atlanta because of ARC and your work. So we're grateful to you and your colleagues for that work. So thank you for that. So Nancy, Jack, as a way to set up our discussion today, you've got some stats for us about what is going on in Metro Atlanta and how Metro Atlanta has grown and changed over the years.
Yes, we'd like to set the stage with some stats that illustrate the good news, the challenges, and all that goes with that. Basically, in the last 30 years that ended 2020, so 1990 to 2020, in the 11-county Atlanta region grew a whopping 94%, which is hard to think about as a native Atlantan. When we got to 1 million, it was such a big deal. But we've gone from just over 2.5 million to nearly 5 million people in our kids' lifetimes. And the 21-county Atlanta region, which includes some of the exurbs, is projected to grow by another 1.8 million in the next 20 years. Bringing the region's total to 7.9 million people. That's as if the metropolitan Indianapolis city moved to the region in the next 30 years. Fulton County alone is expected to increase by another 208,000 people by the year 2050. And just in this last year, 17,400 new residents came to live with us in Fulton County. Current building permit activity for the 11-county region remains lower than the pre-recession permit levels and fell back in the range of 1980 to 2023, the annual average. What that means is, even though we have grown and done and have all these new people here, our construction is like it was 30 years ago. So we really are not keeping up with the demand that's coming. Less construction, fewer homes, supply and demand aren't matching. Certainly one of the reasons that housing around us has become such a challenge.
So let's take some of this, Kristin, and get your thoughts, because I know that you guys deal with these stats all the time. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the ARC, part of our mission is to ensure that our local governments have access to the most current data so that they can make decisions. And the housing data has been something we've been talking about for many years now, and it just continues to get worse and worse as far as the number of homes that we need, the number of shortage of homes. It's something that ARC has been talking about for a long time, but now we're really taking a renewed effort to help communities that are ready to make that step to work on housing in their areas. Just to back up a little bit, ARC is not we don't tell local governments what to do. We're here to assist. We're not giving people prescriptive ways to address things like housing or transportation, but we're here to give them the data and hope that they make the most informed decisions and help them through that. But some of the statistics we look at is just, first of all, the rise in home price. And what you were just saying about statistics on growth and population growth, as we continue to grow, if we don't have the housing supply that's meeting that, the housing prices just go up. And I think most of us have seen that. We've seen it in the homes that we live in now. We've seen it in people that we know that have gone out and tried to buy a home or even find something to rent. So the average home price was $297,000 in 2017 in the region, and it's up to $492,000 in 2024. Effectively, our home prices have close to doubled in that time period, that short time period. And one thing that we look at, we have a lot of partners with the Atlanta region, the Atlanta Fed being one of them. And the Atlanta Fed basically came out in 2022 and said that through their tracking of home prices and median income, that the Atlanta region was deemed unaffordable in 2022, where the median income is no longer sufficient to buy the median priced home. So these are just some statistics that we look at rentals as well, and we've lost about 100,000 rental units priced between $800 and $1,500 per month over a similar time period, around 10 years. Between rentals and home values, we know that we're in a place where regionally, if we want to remain a strong, thriving region, and we want to keep attracting people like we have in the past and keep growing, it's something that we need to address and we need to talk about with our local governments.
Kristin, how much do you talk about housing variety, types of housing? Because we've been focused on the missing middle piece of it. Is that something you're finding across the board, or is that unique to any area?
Yes. So the missing middle and different housing types has been a huge part of the conversation lately because we understand the market will take care of certain aspects. So the market will come in and buy higher or build higher end townhomes, higher end homes. We don't seem to have a shortage of that because it's easier for those to pencil out and for people to make margin on that. But smaller homes and smaller apartment units is something we're just really starting to talk about more. A lot of people call this missing middle. Sometimes they refer to it as gentle density, but it's just ensuring that we have housing units that are affordable and right-sized, I think, for different people at different stages of their life. So that's something we talk a lot about at ARC and within the housing community.
Gentle density. We haven't had that conversation. Density here is talked about in other ways that are less complimentary. So that's something maybe we can work into our conversation.
So there's a lot of discussion about what's caused the rapid rise in housing. Is it just shortage, or are there other components to it, do you think?
There are definitely a lot of different components. So one is obviously the rise in population, just the growing number of people moving to the area, and also the lack of supply. So we lost a lot of home builders after the 2008 recession. A lot of people just exited the market, just went and found other jobs to do. So we are still in a lot of ways recovering and trying to build up that home builder sector. So when people do build homes, or when they build homes more at scale, they really stick to models that have worked for them in the past, but they may not always be models that are maybe the best for the different types of people and different points in life and different price points that are needed out there. We also have issues pretty much over the entire country with zoning, looking at what's allowed in certain areas where you might be able to increase the amount of homes versus where zoning does not allow more homes, or gentle density or higher density, whatever you're looking at. Sometimes it's just simply not allowed in different areas.
So in working through how you get to a point of allowed, how much understanding do you think there is among the general population of this being a problem?
That's a really good question, and I think it is I think that is changing. I don't think there has been as much awareness maybe in the last few years, but just in the last, maybe 2 or 3 years, I really see ARC and the conversations that we have around our different local governments. I think that awareness is really changing, and there are a lot of different ways in which I hear about it. Some of them, for example, I'm doing a project with a city right now that is really, they're mourning the fact that they've lost a lot of smaller businesses and mid-sized businesses because they don't have areas that are more vibrant, walkable areas. So those businesses have just picked up and moved elsewhere to try to be in an area that's already attracting that. So we definitely see with our local governments the desire to relook at areas that they have and understand how housing, especially at different price points for different people, can drive that vitality, that economic development. And that requires really an emphasis on mixed income housing, because you need people who, like I mentioned with the different housing types, who are at different stages of life. So you don't have maybe all the same family, 2 children couples there. You maybe have some single people or some older people that might want to go out and venture out and walk around. Or maybe you do have young families that are just starting out. But anyway, it gives a little more vibrancy. So we see cities looking at that a lot. So that's one way. It's just looking at economic vitality. Another, I think, and I personally share this story, is just listening to people in your family, maybe listening to your friends. So I have 2 examples just that have happened in the last probably 6 months with my family. So my mom lives in Lawrenceville, and she has a pretty large house in a neighborhood. And my dad passed away a couple years ago, and she's been thinking about downsizing. But downsizing doesn't really look the same these days as it used to, because when you look around at your neighborhood and you think you may want to stay in your neighborhood, there may not be anywhere to downsize into, or you might downsize, but you're not saving any money because the townhome is actually as much or more than your existing home. So that downsizing is a factor. So that's one example. Another example, my niece, she and her fiance just got approved for a home, and they were really excited. Around $275,000 was what they were approved for. But then they went and started looking around, and there's just nothing for them. Part of the conversation is that starter home. So you have 2 really good examples there of what we're lacking in a lot of places, which is people just starting out who may need a starter home, or people downsizing. So that's something a lot of communities are really looking at and looking into.
I was talking speaking of this kind of balance of homes or options, I was talking to an economic development person in a city who have been very successful at building starter homes over the last couple of years. And she mentioned that now they're working with developers to have 3 and 4 and 5 bedroom houses, because those starter homes don't necessarily have room for kids, and the school system needs kids to thrive. Is there an ideal model? Is there a place somewhere that you can look at that says this many starter homes, this many?
I think that's going to be different for every community and different based on the school system. But I will say that the best, most successful places seem to be really pushing for that mix of housing, so that they do have a number of larger homes, like you're saying, that are ample for a family with 2 children. Maybe they're teenagers, maybe they need to spread out, but that they have some smaller options for people who, just want to move into that community for the amenities, but maybe they just want something smaller, something with less maintenance. I think the best definitely have a mix, but I think your topic of the school systems is a very important one, and it's one that we work with communities a lot on, is just understanding how their housing impacts their school system. Because if you are stagnant and you're not bringing more children into the school system, that can have negative implications just as much as maybe oversubscribing your school system could, because the school systems really thrive on predictability and being able to maintain a balance. So if you have someone like my mom who's in a 4-bedroom house but doesn't really have anywhere to go, she's locked into that house. And locked in, I think, is a term that people are using now about housing when you just don't really have anywhere to move if you'd like to downsize. So that's also preventing the next family from coming in. So you're not getting as much of that rotation of people who decide to move out and then opening that house back up for a family that might want to move in and take advantage of that school system.
That was a statistic we mentioned last time, that almost a third of the 3+ bedroom houses in the United States are owned by empty nesters.
Yes.
And that's a great example.
Well, and education has been such a driver for us in North Fulton. It has been one of the things that has made us competitive. And it feels like we're getting more competitive among there are places in the region that are looking at this and getting more aggressive about it. And they seem to be attracting a lot of the workforce folks. In so much as our competitive place in the region is at stake as part of this. I'm interested in this program that ARC has, this Local Leadership Housing Action Committee, that local leaders can get involved in and work together and find some answers. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, definitely. So the Local Leadership Housing Action Committee, the first cohort started in 2018, I believe, and it was definitely extended because of COVID. So they wrapped up, I think, in 2022. So that first cohort was around 16 elected leaders. So predominantly mayors, but also city council members. And they go through a 1-year class with ARC where they learn about their own area. They learn data about their own area, but they also learn from experts who come into the class, and it gives them a safe space to talk about housing with other elected leaders. And I think that's really important because they need a space to go in, speak to people who have expertise, but also bounce off issues that they have that are unique to their area and see where they might find other leaders who have the same challenges or maybe who have some solutions to that. So our first cohort included a pretty large area of the metro, and they all made commitments for housing. And a lot of those are being seen through or have been seen through already. Henry County, I think, was one of the first after that, to put in a cottage ordinance. City of Decatur was one of the participants, and they've done a lot of different housing work, a lot of diverse housing types. They committed to hire someone to work on housing, and they also committed to form a housing task force to give information to the council about what they should move forward to. Was a community-based conversation. You also had Gwinnett County, who used their ARPA funds to leverage a pretty large account that incentivizes workforce housing so that they make sure they have people living in Gwinnett County that can work there as well. So since that first cohort, we've had 2 more cohorts, so total about 30 elected leaders. And that's wrapping up toward the end of this year, where they will make their commitments to move forward on housing, and then we'll start another cohort next year in 2025.
It's an exciting opportunity, I think, for our North Fulton leaders. I have not been able to find that any of them have participated yet, so we're hopeful that maybe that can happen. I think that 1-year education is really crucial. It's so easy as a former elected official. I know we did the State Economic Development Division does a class, and Economic Development Academy for elected officials, and it was so informative to understand more about our place in the region and what other people are doing. And so it looks to me like the closest folks I could find to us are Woodstock. It looks like the mayor of Woodstock participated in that. They've done some work on their accessory dwelling unit ordinances. Yes. I don't know how familiar you are with how that landed, but
yes, and that's a pretty new. So they participated last year, Mayor Caldwell, and ADUs. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, we live a lot in acronym world in housing, but yes. Accessory dwelling units, that is a great way for a community to start to add some options for housing. They can be used for housing. They can also be used just for excess space for a house, which I think is what makes them appealing to a lot of different people. I think ideally when we're talking about housing, we would love for people to put in an accessory dwelling unit and rent it out like a workforce unit. That doesn't always happen, but just giving people the option is great. So yes, Mayor Caldwell implemented an ADU ordinance in Woodstock, and Woodstock has done a lot of really great planning just to make sure that their town has housing and is vibrant and their downtown is thriving. So that's a great example for people to look at.
I think it's easier sometimes for us because North Fulton is different than ITP. Inside, Decatur's doing some amazing things, but there's been some pushback about we don't want to be downtown. How is your approach different with maybe suburban communities versus?
I think the main thing is to really understand that community. And I think that's the challenge of being a planner is you can't really go into helping a community with their planning with preconceived notions. You have to go in and talk to the people who live there, work with the elected leaders, work with the businesses. There's so many different components of a community. So when we do our planning work, we do, like you mentioned, we have the leadership groups, but we also do planning through our community development department. We help with comprehensive planning. We have 2 projects. One is called the Livable Centers Initiative, and one's the Community Development Assistance Program. Both of those are ways that we can go into the community. We form groups of people who are embedded in the community already to help us reach out and really understand the need there. And then, of course, data is a huge part of it. So we do a lot of data diving, a lot of data research with our research department at ARC so that we understand kind of the data side of the need and then the human side of the need. And then after that, we start presenting different ideas and working with the community to understand what's going to float to the top. So it's a pretty long process. And I think what stands out to me is the fact that every community is unique, that you have to find the areas where people want to see more vibrancy or more economic development, or maybe gentle density. Maybe it's just smaller, maybe some smaller apartment units that are along a corridor. There are a lot of different ways you can look at it. Sometimes people just want to take an underperforming piece of land and redevelop it. So anyway, I try to go in without preconceived notions and just look at the nuances and the distinctions of the different communities.
One of the things that we are working on with the North Fulton Improvement Network, we consider ourselves a think tank. So we don't get into strict advocacy, but we realize that whatever we talk about is advocacy, just by the fact that we're what we choose to investigate. We're trying to help people understand what we are missing without having more balanced housing. Are there signs we should be looking at? Are there things that we should help people understand, or the price you pay for not having balanced housing?
Yeah, I think that the hard thing with housing is we're starting to see, I think, some of the worst effects of not having it right now. And that is seen in homelessness, which is definitely on the rise. And even if it's something you don't necessarily see day to day, I feel like we're hearing more stories. There was just a story that came out a couple weeks ago about the number of homeless public school students in the metro area. It's over 12, I think right about 12,000 right now. Now, it's not always visible because they may be living in a car or doubling up or living in a motel. But that's the worst that we're starting to see. And I think that is what is, in a lot of ways, sparking this conversation, because for a long time, people couldn't really see the effects of it. You can't just go out of your house, look up and down the street and see that there's an effect of the housing crisis. But we're starting to see it more and hear articles about it. I think other ways people are experiencing it is just in their day-to-day life, understanding some of the staffing needs that aren't being fulfilled. And it's across a lot of industries. I just had a conversation with someone yesterday that owns a law firm and was talking about the difficulty in finding paralegals. And prior to this career here, my husband and I owned several restaurants in Atlanta, and we know firsthand just the crisis that the hospitality industry is in with workers. So it's really across, I think, every industry. It goes from manufacturing to hospitality to legal to healthcare to schools. So I think the more that housing is pinched and people have to live further away and can't come into different communities, I think the more and more we're going to feel that pinch. I think we are feeling it already, but I think it's just something that we're going to continue to experience with this crisis.
That's an interesting point. A few years ago, as probably that in Norcross, in order to get more awareness of the folks that were living in extended stay hotels, one of the churches did a complete canvassing of the hotel and wrote a report, newspaper covered, and that sort of thing, on who's really living there. And I think that was one of the things that helped stimulate the community's response to maybe we shouldn't have so many people that are having to live week to week in hotels, because a good number of them are schools. You just go park in front of any extended stay hotel and look at the number of buses that show up in the morning. And it's more than one.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we have seen a lot of housing forums popping up lately. Very intentional housing forums. There's one that just started up, I think, a few months ago in Cherokee County that I've attended a couple of times, where they have all the different cities in Cherokee County coming together to talk about housing. And it's a very different conversation, I think, than we had probably 5 years ago. You have a lot of different cities coming together and talking about housing, listening to people who are actually on the ground with people who are having problems, and then trying to figure out how we solve this collectively.
Do you know who sponsors those? Is that something the ARC facilitates?
ARC has participated in them, but it's actually sponsored by Cherokee County. So they're the sponsor of that housing forum.
And you've been involved in House ATL for a while. Can you tell us a little bit about that organization?
Yeah, so House ATL, I believe it started about probably 3 or 4 years ago. And it's the 5-county metro. So the ARC region is actually 13 counties. So we work in a bit of a broader area. House ATL covers 5 counties of metro Atlanta. And it's really, since I've been in housing, it's one of the first large-scale efforts to bring together public, private, nonprofit, and philanthropic partners to address housing. So it's really about this collective effort, and they host a member convening every quarter where they come in and they give an update. They have strategic recommendations. House ATL is, I am co-chair of the policy committee, and I am on that committee to just provide expertise from ARC so that when they are looking at their different policies, we can provide the data behind some of those and help people understand the different policies so they can then take that information and then go to their board and have the board make a decision on what policies they may want to put forward as House ATL.
So who would, if someone from North Fulton, is that electeds? Is that staff? Is that general public?
It could be anyone. The member convenings, basically the person, if someone was interested in it, they would become a member of House ATL. And then those member convenings are opened up to people who are members of it. So that is definitely one way to get involved. ARC and a lot of our partners also have education classes. In addition to that local leadership housing action committee, we have a regional housing task force that is more geared towards city staff and county staff so that we can also have a venue for them to interact. And then we're doing a regional leadership institute that is a 5-day class period. It's about 60 different participants from the metro area in all areas. So it could be elected, it could be people in business, it could be real estate, city staffers. So it's a really nice mix of people. And we have a specific day tomorrow that's dedicated for housing with that group. So there are a lot of great ways to get involved in housing.
There are just so many programs ARC does. We can't even touch the iceberg here, but it's wonderful that anybody can participate. And I think when I think about the Livable Centers initiative that you talked about, the LCIs, those are one of the ones that seem to tee us up for financial assistance or grants or all that kind of thing. Are there other like public-private partnership kind of things that can do that?
So the LCI program has been very successful. We are celebrating the 25th year of the LCI program. And those grants are really interesting. They're predominantly transportation-based, but we also are able to weave in things that impact transportation. So it could be housing or natural resources, aging, anything that really touches that transportation. We've done quite a few around the metro area. I participated in one with the city of Clarkston recently. And so the federal funds come through ARC, and they're used to help hire a consulting firm with expertise and then along with ARC oversight to put forward a project to help develop that area to its best and highest use. And it happens over time. So it's typically updated every 5 to 10 years, but it's something that once an LCI area is put in place, it's there for a long time and it gets continual updates based on population changes, needs. But the Clarkston Greenway project was one that I worked on recently. It's won several awards, but it is putting in a trail behind some of the apartment complexes so that Clarkston has a large immigrant community. So the people who live in the apartments are predominantly immigrants. A lot of them don't drive, and they can walk from their apartment buildings to the downtown, but it's also beautifying the stream area there. So that has been a really interesting process. Whenever a trail goes in, there can also be housing concerns because trails inevitably raise the value of the land, the desirability of the land. So now Clarkston will probably be looking at supplementary programs that ARC can assist with around housing, new housing, and making sure the existing housing is retained along that trail. Anyway, so they're all tied in together, but the other program I wanted to emphasize is the Community Development Assistance Program through ARC. It operates similarly as the LCI, where we can engage a consultant as needed for different expertise, or it could be a staff assistance project. But that's another way for communities to have planning assistance that is relatively, so the cost of a typical plan can be upwards of $200,000 or $300,000. So the LCI supplements that, so the community only pays 20%, and the CDAP program is just a flat fee, typically between $2,500 and $10,000, depending on the report. Those are really great ways for communities to have some assistance in their planning without spending a lot. The last one I'll mention is the comprehensive planning. ARC assists with that as well. Those are updated every 5 years per state law, and ARC helps with those free of charge for communities that need that assistance.
You hit on it like we planned it, which we didn't. That is one of the things that we're really focused on is the next, all of our cities are doing it, but the next one up is Roswell is looking at doing it in the next few months. So I don't know if ARC is going to be the consulting group in this. I think they're in the RFP process, but
if they're in the RFP process, that probably means they're hiring an outside consultant. So typically, if they elect not to hire a consultant, then we'll come in and facilitate that. But either way, there's a lot of great expertise out there for that plan.
And do your programs all include some kind of public outreach to educate people on the general public?
Yes, and ARC has really ramped that program up in the last year or so. We have pretty much a brand new community engagement team at ARC that is really vested in making sure we are hearing from the broader community with our plans. And so that's been a great process, and one that we've really worked hard to start really wrapping into all of our planning exercises to make sure that there's adequate engagement and that we're reaching out, not ways similar to not having something just at City Hall, because a lot of times all of the events will be at City Hall, and honestly, the turnout sometimes can be pretty low. I love City Halls. Not everyone in the community wants to go to an event there. So trying to understand how we meet people where they are, go out into the community, as opposed to just having things at City Hall and asking people to show up.
Roswell and Alpharetta have beautiful city halls. One question about policy. I'm very interested in every day that goes by, I get more nervous about land being swallowed up in North Fulton by developers or expensive units. Not that we love developers, but we want them to be thinking more broadly. But one of the things that I'm interested in is using existing space that is no longer going to be used for its purpose. And one that's been on my radar is schools. School system just announced, Fulton County Schools just announced they're examining the closing of 2 schools, one in North and one in South Fulton. North Carolina has built at least 6 teacher housing complexes that they finance through the state employees credit union there. Have you ever heard about anybody talking about that in Georgia?
Yes, definitely. I feel like I've read about it in other states, but I think Georgia is looking at this. Teacher housing and workforce housing is not just a Metro Atlanta topic. It's statewide. The governor has the Rural Workforce Housing Initiative. So we have a lot of conversation everywhere happening around workforce. And I think the schools are so valuable because obviously we need to educate our children. So yes, we do see that. One thing I just wanted to mention as well is when you're trying to look at reusing land, or particularly vacant land banks, can be very effective. We have a Metro Atlanta land bank that is looking at expanding in Fulton County and bringing other cities into that. And we actually, ARC just posted today at 8 a.m. that we're applying for a grant to help bolster things like land banks, identifying land that could be pinpointed for housing or other community benefits, such as parks, but to pinpoint that vacant land and assess whether that could be rolled into a land bank for future use. So that's something that we could look at with all different types of properties.
Wow, this has been great. Kristin, you have given us a lot of information here, and I guess is there anything that we didn't touch on in this discussion that we need to make sure we bring in at this point?
I feel like we've covered a lot, but I think if there are other conversations to be had, I really love to talk to people about housing and ARC. We have 2 people working on housing in our department, so always happy to have that conversation with local governments or citizens. So we are here if people want to reach out.
Terrific. Speaking of that, how can they find you? Give us the coordinates on the Atlanta Regional Commission.
Yeah, so the best way to get familiar with ARC and what we do and our different leadership programs is just to go to our website at atlantaregional.org. And you can also reach out directly to me. So my name's Kristin Allin, and it's Allin with an I. So it's K-Allin, A-L-I-N, at atlantaregional.org. And again, I just really love talking to people about housing and housing needs and attending different housing forums or whatever's needed. So happy to engage.
This has been helpful. We're delighted you took the time to visit with us today. Kristin, thank you very much for your work and for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. It was great.
Absolutely.
And Nancy, do you have a call to action?
Yes. If you would like to get involved, there are a number of things you can do. One thing I always recommend is see for yourself. Go online and search for local homes in the area for our local median income, which is just over $100,000. That's a home price of about $300,000 to $350,000, and just see what choices are out there. It'll become pretty clear. What shape are they in? Are they single family? Are they move-in ready? What are you seeing? And I think it'll become pretty clear. On the rental side, that's about $2,500 a month. If you look at what's available in North Fulton, at or under that, you'll find a number of 1 and 2 bedrooms maybe. But this week I looked, I didn't find anything single family, but very few that are suitable for a family. You can get involved in the local planning discussions. And like we talked about, the comprehensive plan, you can read your city's comprehensive plan if you're really a wonky nerd like we are. We've read them. But even if you don't understand all of the ins and outs of it, if you go to the meetings and you just ask, what's the plan for workforce housing? What's the plan to address middle income? You don't have to have the answers, I don't think. I think there's lots of people there that are ready to once they hear that feedback. And I think the overarching thing is, because this is not a quick fix, it's especially challenging. It's something that we have to keep pushing a little bit at a time. So in the short term, it's about listening, learning, sharing information to move past no and go on to those options we can agree on. So there's a lot more information on ARC's website, which has so many data rabbit holes that we love. There are mapping tools and all kinds of things you can get lost in. And of course, our website, improvenorthfulton.org, gives you some of that. And we have all the socials and information just coming out. So if you share it with other people and have those conversations among your friends and family, we can maybe get past no and think about what we could do.
And we also have this show, North Fulton Voices, right, to bring on experts like Kristin and the others that we've had so far on this series, and stay engaged with us with this show, right?
Yes, and we so appreciate Business RadioX and John for your sponsorship. This is a huge step forward.
Yeah, thank you so much. Jack, Nancy, any final thoughts as we wrap up for today?
Just hope everybody has some way of helping.
Yeah.
Just figure out, listen to what Kathy said or what Nancy said, and see if we can help.
Great words.
Thank you.
Yeah. Jack Murphy, Nancy Diamond, thank you so much again.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And folks, just a reminder that this show, North Fulton Voices, is presented by the North Fulton Improvement Network, improvenorthfulton.org. And North Fulton Voices is the go-to source for in-depth analysis and discussion of the missing middle housing problem and livability challenges that are confronting the North Fulton region. Keep listening as we understand the implications of this problem and explore innovative solutions and examine why housing solutions like the ones that we've talked about in this show are vital for North Fulton's future. You can find the show on your favorite podcast app. Please subscribe as while you're there. Apple, Spotify, we're on all the major apps. And again, this show is sponsored and offered as a service to the community by yours truly and the North Fulton affiliate of Business RadioX. So for Jack Murphy and Nancy Diamond, I'm John Ray. Join us next time here on North Fulton Voices.
Thank you for joining us on North Fulton Voices. This show is presented by the North Fulton Improvement Network, working to solve our community's workforce housing challenges. For more information, visit improvenorthfulton.org.